Welcome to the Everyday Warrior podcast hosted by Men's Journal. Excited to have you, excited to talk about not only your life, but how you impact a lot of your clients and help them to live an optimal life in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, which it becomes an increasingly important thing as we age. I want to dive in a little to your background for the listeners, get into your life story. Especially the fact that you didn't graduate from high school. I'm just going to zone in on this one.
Yeah.
Became a Navy SEAL, and then I just don't understand how a high school dropout was selected by the Navy to become a premier doctor.
A lot of guilt and shame twisted into me. So, so I went to all 4 years of high school. But I was much more interested in girls and cars and sports and fighting and so forth. So didn't apply myself, you might say. I actually started getting D's and F's in third grade. So I had a suboptimal home life. I'll leave it there. And so school was kind of my escape. It was kind of the only time I got to be away from home, and so I spent all my energy, doing the fun stuff, not really working in school. And at the end of 4 years, I had enough credits to be a sophomore, and I wasn't going to stick around after all my friends graduated, but none of my friends knew I wasn't graduating. They just everybody went their way, everybody went to college, and I went and got a GED and went into the Navy. Actually joined in December before I graduated, so December of '87. And they just released a documentary about SEALs. They'd covered a BUDS class, and they kept saying how this is the toughest training in the world. And Crimmins, Crimmins was like star of it, and the tough fisherman from New England guy, right? And so I was like, well, this is the toughest training. I'm going to go do that. So, I was a good athlete. I was a good power athlete. Strength and speed, sucked at endurance. So BUDS was not the easiest experience for me, obviously. I decided I wanted to go do the toughest training I could do. I signed up, took the ASFAB. They just started the dive fair program, so I was guaranteed a shot to go if I passed the test and boot camp. Didn't even know the Navy was going to pay me. That's how naive I was. I just thought they're going to give me clothes, they're going to give me a place to live, they're going to feed me, and then I'm either going to be training for war or in war. So what the hell do I need money for, right? Went into the SEAL team during the Hollywood days. Obviously, like we had the Gulf War, where 3 bullets were shot, so we didn't have anything real. Did a lot of what they call FID now, traveling overseas, training other organizations, and then just training trip after training trip, same thing over and over, kind of on a treadmill. And I was like, I'm gonna go check out something else, go do something else. Knew I'd have to go to college, had to start in junior college. You can't get into college without a high school diploma. So went to junior college, started working at San Diego Sports Medicine Center because I thought I was going to be a physical therapist. And you have to volunteer like 2,000 hours to get into PT school. So I'm doing my volunteer hours. Decided I didn't really want to be a PT. Had every kind of healthcare practitioner in the world at this clinic. So I got to know everybody, and then the doctors there, because I'd been a SEAL, and then I was like in my second year of college. These guys were only like 3 years older than me, like the young doctors. And they're like, you should go be a doctor. And I was like, pump the brakes, sports, right? Like I didn't graduate high school. I'm not gonna be a doctor. And the owner of the clinic, a doctor named Lee Rice, who still practices out in San Diego, overhears the conversation, comes out into the hallway and says, Kirk, the question isn't, can you get into medical school? The question is, would you want to go if you could get into medical school? And I said, of course I'd want to go. He said, well, then what's the question? And I'm like, all right. So he kind of shamed me into it. It was like, yeah, I'd love to be a doctor, but I don't think I can be. So he's like, well, you got to try. So went through college, set the curve in every class, got a 4.0 GPA all through. When it came time to apply for medical school, I found out the military had their own medical school, which I didn't know. But I was already married, already had a kid. Found out they'd pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around. And then, of course, the military, everything they train you for, you repay with time. So I had to be a doctor for them for 8 years. And so I just said, well, I'm sure I'll be able to get back to the teams and go get back to the community, and I'll go do sports medicine, ortho, something like that I'm well suited for. Because, being at my age and being an athlete and a SEAL, like the only thing I knew about medicine was injuries, right? Like that's what I thought a doctor did, like they fix your shoulder, or your elbow, or your knee, so obviously, as you said, I got through medical school, did a residency in hyperbaric and undersea medicine so that I could go work with divers. And they sent me to this policy job with submarine rescue for like 2 years, and then I got to go to the SEAL teams. And then I spent my last 4 years in the military at the SEAL teams and destroyed my career there, helping the guys, but doing the right thing. And so there was no future for me after that job. And so I got out at 19 years.
When you say destroyed your career, you mean you pissed people off?
Yeah, I pissed off everybody in the medical sphere.
Because they were probably wrong.
Well, because they trained me as a doctor to diagnose and treat disease. And none of our brothers had diseases. They had performance issues. And so I had to learn a ton of integrative and functional alternative medicine. I had to learn a lot about nutrition and supplements and hormones and all the stuff that would interfere with performance. And one of the things that I figured out was, our guys, I don't know if the East Coast was the same way, but the West Coast, about 85% of the team was taking Ambien every night. Like that was handed out like M&Ms as a normal thing. They thought it was an inconsequential drug. Just take this and you'll sleep. And so all these guys came to me with these problems of like low motivation, shifts of body composition, moodiness, short attention span. And it wasn't disease. Nobody had a disease, but nobody was performing the way they wanted to perform. And after I learned enough about sleep, I said, sleep could be a big component of this, so let's get everybody off of sleep drugs. And when I did that, like 85% of the people got rid of 90% of their problems just by the sleep. And I was like, oh my gosh, so this is bigger than I thought it was. And then, and then that just segued into me learning more and more about performance medicine, because the military, they got pissed off that I was giving people Myers cocktails, which is an IV of vitamins, and apparently that's beyond my scope as a doctor. I wasn't allowed to do that. And I was giving people like aromatase inhibitors to lower their estrogen so their testosterone would come back up, and I wasn't allowed to do that. And I kept getting investigated and shut down. And
that doesn't surprise me with the military.
No,
very, very close-minded. And if you step outside of their lane, they're definitely going to come over the top.
And I knew they weren't going to let me give these guys hormones, even though their hormones were in the tank. And the same when I work with NFL guys. Like I work with NFL linemen who they're in the normal range by like 1 point, like 250 to 1100. They're 251. They can't take hormones either. So the SEALs were the same way. I knew it because, and that makes sense, right? Because an admiral's going to be on CNN explaining why all the SEALs are on steroids if you give them hormones, right? So I knew I couldn't do that. So I had to figure out, well, how do I optimize hormones? How do I optimize performance? How do I get these people's body comps to shift, And we had a nutritionist, but they were doing very standard nutritional stuff for the general population, not
civilian.
Civilian, yeah.
Nutritionist.
Yeah. She came from a D1 school, worked with athletes, but it still is like, this is a different animal, right? Like we have a different, you think about the healthcare providers that get to work with teams, they have an advantage because that's a sport, and there's a schedule, and there's an off season, and there's downtime, and everything's calculated. It's like when you're a SEAL, when are you going to sleep? Like when is your on season? When do you have to be on?
All the freaking
every
time.
Every day. When are you going to sleep? Whenever you can. How often is that going to be? Who knows? Like you might not get to sleep this week. You may not get a full night's sleep for the next 2 weeks. And so I had to work within this very limited scope. Within our community scope, it was different. And so while the people we hired, we brought from the Olympic Training Center, from professional sports teams, they're working with athletes, which being a special forces guy is an athletic endeavor to be sure, but you don't get a field with like lines drawn on it and so many minutes of play and so many minutes, like it doesn't work like that.
And you don't get blown up.
Yeah, you don't get blown up, and you don't want your buddies to get blown up, and you don't have to work 3 days in a row because schedules got screwed and you don't get to sleep for 3 days, and still you got to go do the DA anyway, even though you're hallucinating already, So that was the sort of the environment that I found myself in, which was different than any other healthcare provider. I was in a great space in that, the SEALs had already killed bin Laden, and they had this fame, right? They had this national notoriety. So I could call up any doctor. I could read a doctor's book, listen to him on a podcast, see his lecture, see his TED Talk or whatever, and I could say, hey, I learned about you here. I think what you do might be applicable to my guys. I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. Would you allow me to train with you? Would you mentor me? Would you coach me? Would you consult on patients with me? And they'd be like, hell yeah, every time. Hell yeah. Well, yeah, I'd love to. And so I had an unfair advantage. I got to learn probably 10 years worth of stuff in 2 years.
Now let's step back. With the special operations community, namely the SEAL Command was probably supportive of what you were doing. It was the traditional, conventional military medical services that were...
Well, so WARCOM has a force medical officer who is my boss technically, and then even at the group, I had a senior medical officer above me who was actually a physician's assistant, because the military does crazy stuff like that. And he told me day one, he's like, hey, because you're wearing that trident, people are going to expect special treatment. And I was like, yeah, and I'm going to give it to them because they're wearing the trident. Like, it's part of the name, right? Special warfare. Like I'm a SEAL, they're a SEAL. Of course, yeah, of course. And he's like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, well, that's what I'm going to do. And so they literally suspended my privileges many times, investigated me, tried to limit what I could do, and I just kept pushing things lower and lower below the radar, but never stopped.
Not surprising.
No.
With the military.
No.
I mean, let's be honest. They want you to be decisive. They want you to have a bias for action. But the second you're out of line,
right,
or your aperture is too open to
right,
other ways of doing business, yeah, they're going to crush you.
And so some senior physician and department head at the Navy hospital would hear
what you're doing,
what I'm doing, because she's seeing one of my patients and be like, what the hell? And they call Force Medical and to be like, oh, all over again. What's this guy doing now? And now it's like what I do, thousands of doctors do now, but no one was doing it back then.
So let's back up. Now, you've made a name for yourself, both within the special operations community and the civilian sector.
Yep.
With regards to sleep. You've become one of the national experts on sleep, and you've even written a book called Sleep to Win, How Navy SEALs and Other High Performers Stay on Top.
Right.
What was it that made you dial in on sleep when you were looking at all these SEALs, these athletes suffering from a lack of performance?
Yeah.
And what is it about sleep that you consider to be the gateway to optimal health?
Right. So the most important part to understand about this is the difference between catabolic and anabolic. So catabolic is when you're taking big complex things and you're breaking them down into small simple things. So as an example, if I'm in famine and I haven't eaten for 3 days and my cells need amino acids, my body will eat my muscle and turn my muscle into amino acids so that my other cells can get the amino acids they need so I can stay alive. That's catabolic. Stress hormones are catabolic. The higher the level of stress you're in, when you're in fight or flight, you're 100% catabolic. Anabolic, exact opposite, what you think of with anabolic steroids, You're taking amino acids and building muscles out of them, right? You're taking small, simple things and building big, complex things. So the most anabolic time in your life, and in fact, really the only anabolic time in your life, is deep sleep. So when you're in deep sleep, you have almost no stress hormones. It's the lowest your stress hormones will ever be, and it's where about 95% of all of your anabolic hormones are secreted. And when these SEALs came to me with their problems, I didn't have the slightest idea how to fix it. I'm like, I got nothing. I have no idea. So I just started testing everything I could, and their anabolic hormones were terrible. Their testosterone was low. Their free testosterone was low. Their growth hormone was low. IGF-1, which is the marker for that, was low. Their estrogen was really high. Their insulin sensitivity was really low. And even though they're ripped and they're in good shape and they look like they should be on it, their inflammatory markers, which is catabolic, right? All of those are really high. So I wanted to fix their hormones, but again, I knew I couldn't give them hormones. I knew even if I gave them thyroid, it would disqualify them. So almost all of them had thyroid problems. So I'm like, well, what could be the thing? So then when I learned what actually happens during sleep, the first 4 hours of sleep, that's your anabolic time. So when you're working out, you're getting weaker, right? You're damaging your muscles. When you go to sleep, your body ramps up anabolic activity and it makes that muscle stronger so that tomorrow it can lift the weight you tried to lift today and couldn't. So once I learned that, and I learned, well, that's where all the hormones are secreted, and then I learned that the sleep drugs interfere with that, let's get them off of sleep drugs, got them sleeping, and once they started sleeping and got rid of the sleep drugs, testosterone tripled, quadrupled, quintupled. I had guys getting PRs at 45 years old. The CEO of SEAL Team 5 sent me his workout log. He's like, I PR'd in 6 lifts at 45 years old. Strongest I've been my entire life. And I was like, oh, this is more than, I wanted to give them hormones, but I knew that the sleep would help a little. I didn't realize that it would be so big. And now the more I learn about sleep, every single thing that you care about happens when you sleep. Anything you want to get better at, it happens when you're asleep. You don't get better at all during the day. You learn things, you don't really learn them until you sleep on them. You exercise, you don't benefit from that until you recover from it.
Let me ask you this. So if you had to put a percentage on the amount of problems that went away once their sleep was back to optimal conditions,
yeah,
what would that percentage be?
80%.
You're kidding me.
80%. And I guarantee you 90% of what remained, 90% of that 20% was from TBIs, which I didn't really figure out.
TBIs are
the traumatic brain injuries from the overpressure, all the blast injuries our guys had. I didn't figure that out until probably 2 years into it. So about halfway through my time working, I realized how important the TBIs was, because the brain is what sets all your hormones. So when your brain's damaged and inflamed, it doesn't balance your hormones right. And everything about your performance is hormones.
So SEAL or not, your average civilian, let's put it that way. As you age, it seems like sleep problems become more prevalent.
Yes.
I mean, even now I'm wearing embarrassingly, a CPAP machine when I sleep. So what can your average person do in terms of either, I've heard it called sleep hygiene. What can they do to optimize their sleep? And I know this thing right here.
Yeah.
And even I've heard TV in the bedroom is the worst thing you can do.
Well, it's not ideal. I wouldn't say it's the worst thing, but it's a not ideal thing. So basically, the most important thing is to convince yourself that sleep's the most important thing. Once you get there, it'll be really easy to learn how to sleep well. The problem is our society does not value sleep, right? Like you think about our community, we go a week without sleep and training just to prove to us we don't really need sleep, I think, right? Obviously we need sleep. And entrepreneurs and C-level executives and like all these people who really get after it, they all believe that sleep is for the weak, that you're lazy if you're sleeping. So the first thing is to convince yourself that sleep's the most important thing. You can do that very easily by going to Google Scholar or PubMed and type in sleep and anything else you care about. Sleep and muscle mass, sleep and parenting, sleep and mood, sleep and cognition, sleep and, I don't care, anything you care about. Start reading the science, you'll be horrified. Once you're scared to death and like, oh my God, I need to sleep, now you're ready. Sleep hygiene is really a fancy word for a bedtime routine. Remember when you have little kids, there's a bedtime routine. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to get a kid ready for bed. We need to get ready for bed too. We don't give ourselves that time. So our ancestors used the sun as the cue as to when to sleep. When the sun went down, the blue light went away. That triggered the chemical changes in our brain to make us sleepy about 3 hours later. And then 3 hours later, we would feel like going to sleep, and then we'd wake up right around the time the sun comes up, and that turns out to be right around 8 hours. And so you think about it, our ancestors think about 1,000 years ago. The sun went down, what would you do? You'd back into your cave, maybe build a little fire. You're very vulnerable. You can't see at night, right? Any kind of predator could get you. You're gonna tuck yourself away. You're gonna have a fire to kind of ward off other animals. Now you really can't see anything. There's not going to be a lot of activity. The sun went down, the air's going to get cooler, you're going to get cooler. So all that sleep hygiene is taking the blue light out of your eyes, decreasing the amount that you're interacting with the environment. If you can wear the blue blocking glasses all you want to, but go out to a nightclub with music blaring and attractive people of the opposite or whatever your preference is.
I like how you caught yourself there.
You know what I'm saying.
With his girlfriend sitting in the audience.
You can do all of that stuff, and you can push yourself to where you're not sleepy because you're interacting with the environment. So decrease the blue light, decrease your interaction with the environment, including your computer. So just because you're wearing blue blocking glasses doesn't mean you can work on a stressful work project until 9:59 and get in bed at 10 o'clock and be like, why am I not asleep in 15 minutes? It doesn't work that way. So decrease your interaction with the environment, including stress, and then lower your body temperature. Those three things are 100% of sleep hygiene. Now you'll see that broken into 1,000 different behaviors and tricks and do this and do that, but that's what everything is for.
I know there's parents listening that have toddlers and they're like, yeah, this is a pipe dream. Thanks,
right.
buddy.
Yeah.
And the only advice I can give to them is get your kids on a sleep schedule.
Get your kids to sleep well, and if your kids are problematic sleepers, nobody likes to hear this, but one of you needs to recover. So you're gonna have to take turns with dealing with the kids, and like one person gets to put in earplugs and eye mask and go down in the basement and crank up the AC and get 10 hours of sleep and recover, and then the next night they're on duty and you switch. But that's the only way to recover. The faster you recover, the less damage you do.
Let me ask you this. Does physiology play into genetics, play into certain people's sleep? And what I'm thinking of, and you probably know where I'm going with this, there's guys like Jocko Willink who can stay up till 12 if traveling on the road, but still gets up at 4:30 and seems to operate at a high degree.
Right.
I can't operate that way. I mean, given I had a lot more combat deployments, a lot more bangs and booms.
Right.
But it does physiology and genetics play into
so it's like anything else, right? Like we aren't all equal, right? That's why the Olympics exist. Nobody's going to pay to watch me and you run 100 meters, right? Because we're not those people, right? So everybody has genetic gifts, and there's no evidence that anybody on the planet is optimal with less than 8 hours of sleep, but there is evidence that certain genotypes, people with certain gene profiles, suffer less. But it's still not ideal. They would still be ideal with 8 hours. So if Jocko slept 8 hours every night, he would be better Jocko than he is. But he just doesn't suffer as much as maybe you and I would. So
he doesn't suffer a larger degradation as you or I would.
Right.
He's definitely a beast. We're going to sort of roll into a mid-break here. And before we take our first break, man, I want to ask you a few hard questions, which is what we do here at the Everyday Warrior. We're going to ask you to get a little vulnerability because, as you know, and I preach this in a lot of my speeches, is you can't have a healthy culture unless you have vulnerability. And amongst the most elite warriors I've ever seen, they were kind, they were empathetic, and they didn't fear being vulnerable with their fellow man. So first one is, hardest decision Kirk Parsley's ever had to make?
Honestly, that would probably be whether or not to get a divorce when I had small children. That was took me many years to make that decision. That was tough. But on topic, the next hardest thing would be, was I going to keep doing everything that I wasn't allowed to do for our guys and possibly lose my medical license and all that other stuff,
So that's the hardest thing you had to face?
Yeah.
Is military punishment for doing your job
well,
right?
because that would have been my whole life. Like that, if I would have lost my license in the medical school or in the military, that would have followed me in the civilian sector.
You would have been done.
I'd be working on Harleys or digging ditches right now. I wouldn't be a doctor.
You'd be a pretty good ditch digger.
I think so.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, look at you, dude. You're a beast.
I got good arms for that.
You know what I got to say about human performance doctors is, I'm always fearful. It's much like a trainer,
Right.
like at a gym who's got a little bit of a belly hanging over their belt. You're like, what's your qualifications?
Yeah.
Do you live with credibility?
Yeah. And there's other guys who have a lot more than a little bit of a belly.
Yeah. Last question before we take this break. The hardest regret you live with?
The hardest regret.
No regrets.
No regrets. Man, it's a foolish regret, and I've actually expressed it to a guy out here in the audience before. Leaving the SEAL teams pre 9/11 and never getting to go to combat, not because I wanted to go to combat, but because I felt like I was deserting my brothers. And when one of those guys died, we all kind of have this stupid image of ourselves that maybe it would have been different or whatever. And so I regret getting out of the SEAL teams, but I don't regret what's happened since. So it's a mixed bag, but that one haunts me. Like I always think, like maybe,
Well, regardless if you went to war or not, you prepped the next generation. And given some of the stories you tell me at dinner, I'm so glad that the SEALs in the 90s did not go to war. You guys were the wild children, and God help us if we unleashed those beasts.
We were truly the
war.
dirty dozen back then, yeah.
You guys were. Well, with that, we'll be right back. And we are back with Doc Kirk Parsley, Navy SEAL, and nationally renowned, can I say that? Nationally renowned sleep and human performance doctor.
You could actually say internationally.
Internationally.
I've lectured internationally.
You're renowned
I'm
to me.
an international guy.
Let me, dude, because you are a beast. And I know people will see you on the videos for this. How old are you?
I'll be 52 next month.
That's fucking old.
I know.
Okay.
It's probably, I'm just, every day's gravy from now. I've already lived longer than I expected.
You look good, dude. If I look as good as you when I'm 52, that's going to be a victory.
Well, you better start working.
Yeah, we'll compare body scans after.
No, we
after
won't.
This.
Yeah, I'm sure you're leaner than I am.
Okay, so we talked about sleep, and that was educational, I think, for everyone in the crowd, and educational for the listeners. It's something we just dismiss it. I mean, you can dismiss it when you're 20 getting drunk with your buddies operating off of 2 hours of sleep and then go to work. But as you get older, it's not there.
You think about just our society in general, and not just America, but Western society. What's the first thing you give up?
Sleep.
Right.
For anything.
It's like time crunch. Oh, I got to get all this stuff done. I don't have enough time. I'll go to bed later. I'll get up earlier. Right. That's the first thing we give up. It should be the last thing we give up, because it impacts everything we do. And so whether you're using your body or your brain to get that project done, you're impairing the process. So if you say, well, I'm going to cut my sleep short by 2 hours, you're going to lose about almost 3 hours of efficiency that next day. So it's a negative sum game, and you're tearing yourself down. You're aging, really, right? Because if you had perfect sleep, what would happen is you would go to sleep and you would repair 100%, and you would wake up the next day exactly the way you were that morning, so you would never age.
So I understand this, and I understand this because of you. And I know for the listeners, Kirk and I have known each other for a long time. I am in bed by probably 8, and I think my wife calls me the gremlin because she's watching reality TV, and she pokes me to watch a certain scene. I react not well, and so she calls me the gremlin. So we'll move beyond sleep, but I mean, you went as far to create Doc Parsley's sleep remedies. Where can people find that, and what is it?
Yeah. So when I decided that I wanted to get the guys off of the sleep drugs, obviously they were taking sleep drugs because they couldn't sleep. So I had to give them something, and right, I had to substitute with something. And all pharmaceuticals are really kind of the same. There's nuances, but they all mess up the sleep architecture, which is like the different stages of sleep. So because I could work with all of these experts all over the world in sleep and nutrition and neurology and all these things, I did my own research and I figured out what supplements actually help with sleep and why. And I just made a list of all of them, and then all the team guys were going to buy this. They're going to buy the list of all these products one by one, and then they just harangued me into making a product because they're like, "It's a pain in the ass. We got to go to all these different stores."
So you were in a van down by the river, basically concocting different ingredients.
No. So I was sending them to the store, and then they were like, "Man, I got to buy this in a powder, and this is in a pill, and this is a 90-day supply. That's a 60-day. I got to travel with all this shit. Can you just make something?" And I was like, all right, I'll try. And then I dropped out of clinical practice, said I'll build this supplement over the course of a year. I'm just going to sell it to the SEAL teams. And then I'm going to go back into clinical, like brick and mortar. And I just survived off of consulting. Like I gave up my income. I said, I'm just going to build this real quick. Had a couple of friends invest, and we built it up real quick. Still don't sell to the SEALs 6 years later. No contracts with the military. A ton of SEALs buy it. A ton of military people buy it on their own. And I give them like a big discount because that's why I built it. But it turned into a real business. Then when I go lecture all over the place, and people are like, "Well, what's a good sleep supplement?" Well, I happen to have one. Right.
Mine's the best.
Yeah.
Now, you've also created recently a sleep journal, which, I mean, you've shared with me.
Yeah, so it's basically what we were talking about, like all the sleep hygiene stuff, but also like how do you get stress out of, because the number one reason people don't sleep well is stress. So how do you remove stress from the equation? So I've written blogs and given, I gave a 4-day lecture on just that topic, like 4 8-hour days. And I've basically made a journal that's a summary. And we're selling it on my site. But if anybody listening to this or anybody in the audience that wants that, if you just email me at kirk@docparsley.com or kirk@docparsley.com, I'll email you. It's a PDF. We have it in a bound, but I'll email you that. But if you go to docparsley.com, my website, you can buy the journal on there. You can buy the sleep supplement on there. You can listen to hundreds of hours of podcast if you're so inclined, or watch lectures, read blogs, whatever. There's a ton of sleep stuff on there. There's other stuff, hormones and what have you, but yeah.
Let's get into to the human performance side, which I know has become your passion, because so many of us that know you come to you and say, hey, I'm not feeling right.
Right.
It actually reminds me, and again, I think it was, not to hone in on Jocko, I think it was 2006. I was about to turn 30. I think he was 35 at the time or something like that. And he's like, hey, when you turn 30, nothing will heal the same. I'm like, whatever. No. I'm like, you don't know me. I'm a high performer.
Right.
I'm good. And he was right.
Right.
And it got worse at 40. And I'm going to assume it only gets worse at
50.
At 50.
At 50 is when I really started getting injuries that didn't heal, like to take months to heal. And I'm like, man, that's what it healed in 2 weeks in my 20s.
So explain to me, and it reminds me of, I think it was the old John Wayne quote, and I won't use the word, getting old isn't for cowards.
Yeah.
What is it specifically as we age as men? What is degrading to the point that human performance medicine can step in and start to provide relief?
I mean, it's the same. It's the same for men and women. Again, like the metaphor I gave earlier. If you think about a kid, think about a 14-year-old. A 14-year-old goes to sleep. They sleep for 12 hours if they're uninterrupted, right? If they don't have to get up, they'll sleep for 12, maybe 14 hours. But they actually wake up better than they were the day before. So they grew, they improved, they got smarter, they got stronger, they got faster. And then at some point, roughly around 30, it could be anywhere from 25 to 35, depending on your genetics and how you lived your life and how serious you are about the other pillars of health, like nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation. it becomes a wash, and you're like going to bed, recovering about the same as you were the next day. And then somewhere around 35, it starts dropping off, and you don't recover 100% every night. And that's largely hormone, but there's a lot involved. It's epigenetics, which is like what genes are expressed. There's things called senescent cells, so like older cells that are dying. There's blood flow issues. As you get atherosclerosis, you don't get as much blood and oxygen. And if you think about it, all aging really means is that you're becoming less capable of recovery, right? Because when you're old, why do you die? Well, you die because you can't fight off illness as well. Your immune, right? You just don't recover as well. You fall down the stairs, you don't recover as well. You get injured, you don't recover as well. So you're more likely to die as you get older. And that's really all it is. You're just not as capable of recovery. So recovery is everything. It's your nutritional status, it's blood flow, it's hormones, it's genetics, it's your, and that can be supplemented, like supplemental nutritions. Like you could be deficient on micronutrients, you could be deficient on vitamins, you could be, there's herbs that can adapt sort of your hormone regulation. There's actual hormones, there's peptides that mimic things in your body that affect your immune system, that affects your recovery. Like all of those things matter. But the lifestyle is 90% of it, right? You still have to sleep well. You still have to eat well. You still have to exercise regularly. Exercising regularly is the best thing for longevity, is the best thing to fight off disease, is the best thing for cognition, and it's the best thing for everything, and then you got to be able to control your stress. And that can be mindfulness, that can be meditation, that could be maybe you control your stress through exercise, right? That's like maybe you're a meditator, maybe you do yoga. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as some people get it from community. That's why a lot of people with community who go to church or they live in big families, they live longer because they have community, they have lower stress, they feel like they have more support. And so you have to balance all of those things, but that's an ideal lifestyle. But then there's reality, right? Because there's limitations to what you can do, and then in between here is where we supplement. That's where we give you supplements. Maybe there's a pharmaceutical, maybe there's a hormone, maybe there's a SARM, maybe there's a peptide, maybe maybe there's a gadget we can use to help you meditate. There's a gadget we can use to help you get to sleep faster. There's a gadget we can use to help you monitor your nutrition better.
You bring up the SARMs, you bring up the peptides, you bring up the hormones, and let's solidify this before you even go there.
Right.
You have to have that foundation of what you said: sleep, proper nutrition, and exercise.
Right.
And
you could take horse doses of hormones and SARMs and peptides, drink beer all day, eat pizza, and not work out, and you're not going to be healthy. Like, that's not the way it works. Like, you have to have the foundation to get the benefit from it. Those things don't matter at all if you aren't doing the other things right.
So, and we're going to get into psychedelics briefly today. And we're going to bring on Dr. Martin Poblanco, who we both know and has been critical to our lives and helped a lot of our brothers with trauma therapy. When you mention SARMs, peptides, and hormones, there's just like this dirty connotation that people are like, no, I don't want to do that. That's
and it's so dumb, but it's just the way it works, man. It's just politics.
Because if my testosterone is low, the only way to increase that to a meaningful level outside of sleep, nutrition, and exercise is to actually supplement to get my testosterone in a healthy range.
I mean, if you were 35 and your hormones were low, there's probably other pharmaceuticals I could give you that would get you up there. But once you get over, once you get to like mid 40s, the odds that we're going to get you up into that upper 20% of the range, which is where all the real benefits shown to be. If you take the bell curve of what's normal, it's a huge range, 250 to 1100. So what does 600 tell me? In the range, right? Is that in the range for you? Like, I don't know. I'd have to know you your whole life, right? So, but when you stratify that and you say, all right, let's break it down into 20th percentiles, quintiles, the people whose total testosterone are in that upper quintile, lowest risk of death, lowest risk of disease. So that there are one, right? What's your risk? One. You go down to the next quintile, it doubles. It doubles again when you go down, doubles again when you go down, doubles again when you go down. You do the math. If you're in the lowest quintile, you're 16 times more likely to die of anything. You're 16 times more likely to have any disease. But baseball players use testosterone to cheat in a home run contest, and so we don't want to give you testosterone.
Which was the greatest
like
year of baseball.
It was like the coolest part of baseball ever.
Sosa, McGuire.
Yeah,
that was the greatest year.
I gave a lecture to a professional baseball team, and I used McGuire when I did the testosterone slide. It was him hitting a home.
And he was in the crowd.
He was one of the coaches on the team. But he was totally cool about it. He talked to me for like an hour. He's a great guy.
I don't care what anyone says. I remember that one season. I don't remember any other season.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the best baseball we've ever seen. So, let's talk about blood work, because whenever I come to you, the first step is always, hey, let's get blood labs.
Right.
It's almost from a person that doesn't have a medical background, it seems like that's always sort of your baseline. The blood says all.
I mean, it has to be, right? Like, it doesn't have to be blood. It could be blood, it could be urine, it could be saliva, depending on what we're testing. Mm-hmm. But it'd be the same if you came to me and said, hey, I'm having sleep problems. And I said, how much are you sleeping? You said, I don't know. Like, all right, well, I don't know what to do with that. But let me do some labs on you, right? Same thing, I'm having problems. Well, I don't know what your hormones look like. I don't know what your inflammation looks like. I don't know what your toxicity levels are, right? You could have like environmental toxins. Being a team guy, especially your team, I guarantee you have lead toxicity. If you've never worked to get it out, you have it. So I don't know any of that until I test. And once I see everything, I can say, this is probably the first thing we should work on, because this is like, this one thing will fix 60% of the things, and then this one thing will fix 10%. And then we figure out the order in which we.
Now correct me if I'm wrong here, because it seems like traditional medicine. What I mean by that is when I go in for my annual checkup,
right,
with my TRICARE doctor,
right,
who's not exactly hitting a high percentage there. Even in my 40s, they're not asking for robust blood labs. What can a male in his late 30s, 40s, and 50s do on his own outside of his general practitioner to check those levels?
Well, I mean, in this day and age, with all of the environmental, the BPA you hear about in the plastics, but almost all of these environmental toxins, like the pesticides and those other things, these things all act like estrogen. So that's why they're affecting men more than women. And so the first thing that any man needs to do is get a full hormone profile. And that full hormone profile goes from cholesterol all the way past testosterone to DHT and estradiol, because testosterone can become one of those two things. We need everything in between there so that we know what we're dealing with. And then we need standard blood work on top of that. And then we need, your thyroid hormones and your adrenal hormones, your stress hormones. We need to, because every hormone affects every other hormone. So that would be the baseline. I would say if you're 35 or over, that would be the most important thing to do. And then it would be like a metabolomics, which would be like your vitamins and minerals, which is not standard labs either. So, and then if you have a job like you've had, I'd say, well, let's check you for lead toxicity, let's test you for manganese, let's look at your toxic levels. But Joe Blow, he has basically gone to college, got married, got a job. I'd say full hormone panel, and I mean every hormone you can test for: insulin, thyroid, cortisol, every anabolic hormone, every catabolic hormone.
Now, some of this sounds cost prohibitive.
You can get that whole panel for like $600.
That's a lot of money for a lot of people.
Well, you would only have to do that big of one maybe once. Mm-hmm. But like TRICARE would, if you told your doctor, hey man, I want these things, if you have healthcare insurance, your doctor can order most of those things. And if you had to just go add a few things after that, you could probably get away for $100, maybe $200.
Now, for the guys listening that can't afford SARMs and peptides and hormones, is it always just go back to those core three: sleep, nutrition, exercise?
So I say sleep is the foundation that the pillars sit on, right? So sleep's the most important thing, and then you have a pillar of nutrition, you have a pillar of exercise, you have a pillar of stress mitigation. If sleep's bad, all the pillars are going to fall, right? Because that's the foundation. But if you're, say, a shift worker and you don't have an option, optimize those 3 pillars for sure, and sleep's not going to be great. That's the way your life's built. But those guys can do some pretty obvious hormone improvement. So you can take some supplements. There's adrenal supplements that will help you repair your adrenals. Taking something as simple as 7-keto DHEA, that will improve your testosterone because that can't become estrogen. Taking zinc, 60 milligrams of zinc citrate a day, that'll block estrogen conversion by a little bit. That'll raise your testosterone. A man's always going to feel a little better with testosterone, with a little more testosterone. So that would be a place to start. If you couldn't do any labs, it's not going to drive you high, right? If we did happen to do labs and you turned out you were like maxing out the testosterone level and you did all that other stuff, it wouldn't change your testosterone level because you maxed it out. Like it's a self-regulating system. So that would be worth trying.
Let's get into a subject that, I mean, you've spoken a lot about it. ED, erectile dysfunction. And I'm just going to state, I don't have erectile dysfunction. My wife's in the audience.
Yeah.
I want that to be understood. No. But seriously, again, let's look at the SEAL community. A lot of brothers had this issue because of the things that they faced and the physiology of the impacts they faced at war. What's the biggest misconception about ED and who's most frequently affected by it?
Well, so I would say the biggest misconception about ED is that is that once that happens, you're doomed, because it can be an intermittent thing. It can be something that it can be caused by psychology, which is really common. Unfortunately, in today's world, porn addiction is a big reason for it. But your psychology around performance, if it doesn't quite work one night, it's more likely to happen again. So the biggest misconception is like, oh, now I have ED, that's me from now on, right? I'm going to be fighting this forever. No, like it's very possible it's just a short-term thing. You need to massage a few things around and then everything's going to come back. And then the other misconception is that it's rare. It's not rare. Like it's like 60, 70% of people men probably by 40 have had it, and by 50 it's probably closer to 80%.
No kidding.
And then that doesn't mean it's every time, but it's like, 1 out of every 10 times maybe you're like, hey, this isn't working, right? So it's something that's bound to happen, like gray hair. Like there's going to be some degree of that at some point in your life, and just roll with it, man. It's just like whatever. It's it's something to work on, and there's a ton of treatments. There's so many things you can do.
But bottom line is, just go see your doctor. Don't be embarrassed about it.
Go see a doctor. Don't be embarrassed, and like talk to other people. I'll be vulnerable here. Like I had an issue with that after I had COVID, and I started talking to people, and they said every time I talked to a guy who had COVID, he was like, you know what, I kind of had that too. Because it wasn't a severe thing, but it was like, yeah, this is really different. Like, what's going on here? Nobody wants to talk about it.
Do you think that's what the Chinese were after? Was to cause ED?
They were probably after
the American
me
male
having
populace?
ED.
Okay.
They didn't want me to procreate anymore.
Got it.
Yeah.
Damn the Chinese government. Let's talk a little about, and for the listeners, Kirk is not going anywhere. In fact, Kirk is part of this Men's Journal Everyday Warrior initiative. He's going to be a contributor. He's going to be helping men get back to that optimal health, and we're going to be diving in detail to a lot of the things we've discussed on this podcast. But I want to talk about mental health really quickly again, which, again, is like ED is not something to be embarrassed about.
Right.
I struggle with my mental health depending on environment, stressors. That's just being human. But
you have 1,000 head injuries.
I've got lesions on the brain. I've got multiple lesions on the brain.
Like every Special Forces guy has had thousands of head injuries. Just the overpressurization, the blast, gunfire, Carl Gustav's, like those are head injuries.
But regardless, if you served at war or not, I mean, there's trauma. I mean, there's mental health. I mean, the environment in society today. But let's talk about again, similar to your approach that pissed off traditional Navy medicine,
Right.
you started referring a lot of these SEALs that were dealing with mental health issues. Yeah, if people want to say PTSD, that's fine. I call it survivor's guilt.
Yeah, I don't think we need a D. We don't need to call it.
It's not a disorder.
We don't need a disorder.
No.
And I don't think we need the post-trauma, right? It's stress. And does it really matter if the stress is because of your job? Does it really matter if the stress is physiologic because of injuries? Does it matter if it's because of an emotional event? Does it matter if it's because you're going through bankruptcy or because you're going through, it doesn't matter. It's stress, and that stress is catabolic. It's breaking you down. It's interfering with your sleep, which is breaking you down even further. And almost every major psychiatric disease is preceded by a period of insomnia. When you can't sleep well, your brain doesn't work well, and anything you're susceptible to, your neurochemistry changes, and you may get depressed, or you may be a little bipolar, like you might have a touch of that, and you may go into a manic episode. You know, there's all sorts of things that can come out of that. And things just as simple as your cognition. When you can't remember things and you can't focus well, you can't pay attention well, you start doubting yourself, and that doubt cycles into more stress, which makes it harder for you to do all of that stuff. And now you have anxiety because you can't trust yourself to perform, and you don't know what the hell's wrong with you. What's going on with me, right? So we all have it, and it all manifests itself as a disorder, right? Meaning that we're not performing the way we want to perform. And it can always be improved upon. No matter how dialed in you are, we can do better. And so if your optimal's here and you're living here and you get down here, you feel it. But getting back here might just be how you perform, and we can still go better. Yeah.
So we both come from the same community, and the SEAL community, the military at large, always had a motto: suffer in silence.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm glad to say that has been broken.
Right.
And the most masculine thing you can ever do, the biggest thing as a man, the strongest thing is to say, hey, I'm having mental health issues.
Yeah.
And if you're around a good tribe, they'll wrap their arms around you and they'll say, hey, that's okay. Let's get somebody to talk to. But so the VA, which I'm not going to sit here and bag on the Veteran Affairs. There's good people that work in the Veteran Affairs that care, but unfortunately they work under regulations.
They're overly regulated, underfunded, and
much like Navy traditional medicine.
I mean, it's just
So even within the civilian world, though, mental health issues are usually dealt with a prescription pad.
Right.
And I had buddies that were on 17 different pills.
Very common.
You said this doesn't make sense.
No.
And you said we need to open our aperture, and you started referring SEALs to a psychedelic therapy retreat in Mexico.
Well, I could only do it after.
Yes,
they had to be out of the teams. But in the active duty now can do things right now because of MAPS. People can do MDMA and people can do ketamine because they can go into a clinical setting and do it. And in those days you couldn't do anything. But I referred people who were, writing their suicide letter, about to start their pistol, and I'm like, hey, this treatment actually scares me. I'm nervous to recommend this to you, but I'm going to go down there with you.
What other recourses
the person have? It's like you're about to kill yourself.
Yeah.
If this thing kills you, I'll feel guilty forever, but it could turn things around, and it turns things around, and all it takes, the first guy that I had do that had an amazing result, and then he told 2 of his buddies, and you know how it goes from there. And now you have 400 plus of our
special
guys.
Operations guys.
Yeah, and way more than that have gotten amazing results.
Well, I went because of you.
Yeah,
and you told me, and I pushed that off for 2 years, but I want to say that was the most interesting experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
And in particular, and we're going to sit down with Dr. Martine and do an episode here shortly, and we're going to dive into the details, but the 2 forms of medicine, and one, I got to say, the setting that they create for that weekend could not be more professional, with cardiologists, with heart rate monitors.
Right.
You go through a thorough medical screening, but first night was Ibogaine, which I'll be honest was rough.
Right.
I wanted to get off that ride real quick.
Yep.
But that set the conditions for the next thing, which was 5-MeO-DMT, which Mike Tyson on the Joe Rogan podcast has talked about, the ego killer, which was the most spiritual thing I've ever experienced. And that was life-changing.
I've done that one myself, and I had the same experience. Yeah.
And the amount of, again, it goes back to the stigma of, I was even afraid to tell my dad. I'm 44.
Right.
I was afraid to tell my old man, who's a devout Roman Catholic, that I was going on a psychedelic therapy.
And again, that's all politics. It's just like the hormones, just like testosterone. Like testosterone exists in your body. It exists in men and women. It's a natural hormone. When it's dysregulated, why don't we re-regulate it? Political reasons.
Well, psychedelics have been known about for a long time, and in the 60s they started studying them, and some congressman's son
Overdosed on some kind of psychedelic, and all the psychedelic research went away until 10 years ago. And now they're going, oh my gosh, it does all this amazing thing. Who would have ever figured that a plant that evolved to be on the planet at the same time of us, that we could ingest and has a benefit to us? Well, we eat plants and that benefits us, so why would we think that eating some other plant that causes some other kind of reaction that is beneficial, why is that bad? Again, it's all political. It doesn't make any sense from a healthcare practitioner. If I look at, if I'm looking at a SEAL who's suffering, I don't
Anyone
care.
who's suffering,
I don't care what we have to do to get rid of the suffering, right? Let's do that. If this works, let's do that. Why would I say, oh, no, not that? You can take these 17 pills, but don't go drink that plant, or don't go take that pill of that psychedelic medication. It makes no sense. And our community specifically, it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard for people to open up. It's hard for people to admit that they can't fix everything. And so, as you know, those drugs show you're not anything, buddy. You can't fix anything, and you're not all that.
Well, one of the key supplements that came from that trip that is a part of my daily regimen is microdosing.
Right.
Microdosing of psilocybin.
Right.
Which is probably one of the greatest mood enhancers and even focus supplements that I've ever taken. And no, at no point am I ever, I'll say, tripping or going into a psychedelic journey with microdosing.
Right.
And I know for some people, psilocybin wasn't working, so they're microdosing LSD. Again, same effect. They're not tripping.
Well, people even microdose Ibogaine.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I would not try that.
You can microdose anything.
Okay.
Microdose anything.
Well, guys, Kirk, at this point of the show, we want to turn it over to the audience. If there's any questions for Kirk and the wealth of knowledge that he has, we've got a microphone in the back. Please feel free. Naira's holding it. Please feel free to ask any questions.
Hey, Dr. Kirk, it's Austin Talley. I definitely, I'm going to be reaching out. One of my best friends and I both have a problem where we just can't turn our brain off, it seems like.
Yeah.
We have two different life experiences. Mine is 10 years of combat, and him is the stresses of entrepreneurship, without a doubt, because every day you think you're going to go out of business.
Y'all are my two clients. That's who I work with. 99% of who I work with right there.
I guess if you could sum up any assistance how to turn our brain off a little bit, because I've done the blue light glasses I even use them to watch TV now. I don't pick up any electronics without them. Right. But I obviously, I'm going to be hitting you up for more of a personal one-on-one, but any guidance on that?
So basically you're jacked up at night. You can't sleep because your mind is racing.
Some days I can go to sleep at 9 o'clock at night, and some days it's not until 3:30 in the morning, and I'm still waking up at 6:50 every day without an alarm clock.
Yeah, well, what I can say is, there's a medical board specialty for doctors that work with people who have sleep diseases. I'm not that guy, So I'm a physician that values sleep and teaches a lot about it. So I don't work with sleep diseased people. If they have a disease, I send them to a sleep specialist. But I can tell you, almost every single client that I've ever had, whether it's a SEAL I'm just consulting as a friend, or a client who's paying me, almost every almost every one of them, and I can't think of any exceptions, but I'll still say almost, stress is the reason they can't sleep. And I've developed over the years this seemingly ridiculously simple protocol to get rid of stress around sleep. And it's the most powerful thing I do. It's more powerful than any hormone or pharmaceutical I do. And it's just a process to remove stress from the sleep environment, from both getting ready for sleep and while you're asleep.
You had a perfect opportunity right there to be like, just go to docparsleySleepAids.com and buy my supplements.
My supplement might help a little bit, but if you're really stressed, there's nothing in there that's going to knock you out. But that sleep journal that I was talking about, that has here's how you categorize all your stresses, and here's how you get rid of those around bedtime. Here's how you get rid of those if you wake up in the middle of the night. And so it's a process. It'd take a while to explain, but it's in that sleep journal.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I'll be quitting my entrepreneurship partnership then and hitting you up for better sleep ideas.
Right on.
All right.
All right, we got time for one more question, maybe.
Okay, so what if you get enough sleep, but you're still tired all the time? But I mean, like, you get enough sleep, but you're still just always exhausted, just
How do you
tired.
how do you know you're getting enough sleep?
I just feel like even when I get like 8-9 hours of sleep a night consecutively, it's still tired.
Do you wake up tired?
Yeah.
Then you're not getting enough sleep.
Is it enough sleep or good sleep?
And that's what I was going to say. You might be sleeping for 8 hours, but the sleep quality might be worth 4 hours.
So it's just lack of quality sleep, which is...
If you're waking up tired, then there's something wrong with the sleep. It's either the duration of sleep, or it's the quality of sleep, or both. So again, that would be kind of the sleep hygiene thing. We need to make sure that caffeine's not getting involved. We need to make sure stress not getting involved. We need to make sure there's no medications getting involved. There's no metabolic thing. Like if you were, say, pre-diabetic and you have poor insulin control and poor blood glucose control, that can interfere with sleep. There's lots of things. You could be a really bad snorer. You could have sleep apnea, where you're actually stopping breathing and becoming acidic. There's a lot of things that could be happening in there, but it's if you're waking up tired, it's not enough sleep, either because you're not sleeping enough hours or there's not enough quality in the hours that you are sleeping.
And also, do you have a practice somewhere, or I might have missed that?
I practice virtually, right? So I do online consulting. I'll meet with you once and do labs and so forth, and then everything else will be online from there.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
And where can they find you?
So DOC, short for doctor, and then my last name is Parsley, like the herb, so docparsley.com.
And we'll make sure when we release the podcast that everyone has those URLs, those links. Well, thank you. Before we say goodbye, we like to end this podcast with two of our own questions. And again,
right.
Much like the hard questions, these are deep. How will you measure your life and whether you've lived well?
I measure my life through courage. And courage to me just means doing what I know I need to do. And at this state, in different stages of my life, that meant different things. But at this stage of my life, what I care the most about is relationships. And so having the courage,
Damn right.
having the courage to always say what needs to be said, not leave anything unsaid in case tonight's my last night. And that's I keep the record in my head. I know when I don't have the courage, and I know when I'm petering out, not doing what I should do. But as long as I'm doing, we all know what we should be doing. As long as I'm doing what I know what I should be doing, having the courage to do it.
Now, for all of us, are there any specific rules or codes, what I could also call your keys to success, by which you live your life?
I would go back to that one. You know, I would still say doing what you know, having the courage to do what you know you need to do, and if you don't have the education to do it, having the courage to say you don't know and learning how to do it. I think it all comes down, and that's sort of a personal integrity. If I visualize a future I want, and I come up with a plan for moving towards it, I have to have the courage to do all of those things along the way, even when I don't want to do them. And I consider like being tired and not feeling like doing it and still doing it, that's still courage, right? You're still doing what you know you want to do, even though you don't feel like doing it. And so, like, I think that's the most important thing, because everything else is nuanced and individual, but...
Well, it sounds like you're describing more so than physical courage, moral courage, which is a rare trait.
Moral,
the rarest of traits.
for sure.
Rarest of traits amongst men, especially even in the SEAL teams, we saw a lack of moral courage sometimes.
Absolutely.
To stand up for what's right, regardless of the outcomes. Well, Kirk, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I mean, there's so many subjects here that we need to do a deep dive on, but we have much more time. We have the articles that will be issued under Men's Journal, The Everyday Warrior. I know men are interested in these subjects, how they can get back to optimal health for sustained periods, if not the rest of their life. So
Yeah.
We'll get there, man. We'll get there. And thanks for listening. Now, don't forget, visit mensjournal.com to sign up for the newsletter and get the latest Everyday Warrior strategies and tactics to living a purpose-driven, fulfilling life, which all of you so rightly deserve. And again, under that Everyday Warrior concept, the 3 pillars are mental health, physical health, and spiritual health. Maybe with a little adventure mixed in there.
Yeah.
Whether you're a man or woman, make sure to pick up the new issue of Men's Journal magazine. It's packed with amazing features on, just as we discussed, health and fitness, adventure and travel, style, and the coolest gear hitting the market today. Thank you, and until next time, this is Mike Sarraille with the Men's Journal Everyday Warrior podcast, out here.